So, Silksong. With a major difficulty spike compared to the first game and the more unforgiving hitboxes, it sometimes seems like the game is meant to be impossibly difficult, even on the runbacks to the boss that you failed 30 times. However, there's a silver lining because there are plenty of useful abilities that you can pick up to make your life easier and a few speedrun skips that help you get past some of the major difficulty spikes. So before we begin, let me just say welcome to Epoch, your place for everything indie game related, and let's talk about some skips and tricks you might need in Silksong. Of course, if you haven't played through the game, then be warned there will be spoilers all throughout this video, so with that, let's get right into it. Now, Silksong's first area doesn't have much to offer in useful skips and tricks, apart from this handy little rosary string that you can pick up in this first little bit. Rosaries are extremely useful, being the currency of Farloom, and although there are plenty of ways to gather large quantities of these, it's not the easiest to gather them in the early game. However, looking at speedrun strategies can help with that. For one, there's a way to skip over almost the entire Marrow area by luring this beast fly over to this ledge and pogoing off the top of him, which although being a tad bit difficult and sometimes requiring several attempts allows you to skip all the way to Chakra the map maker. However, there's nothing that you can buy as you haven't been able to collect almost any rosaries at this point, but there is something that can help with that. Taking another note from speedrun strategies, by leaving the room through the top left exit and heading to the left until reaching this top left exit, you'll be able to break a wall in this room, allowing you to pick up a useful trinket that will give you 180 rosaries. However, you would first have to get to Bellheart and free the townspeople in order to actually get the rosaries from this NPC. However, it's still something worth picking up while you're there, as it's right next to the pickup area for the Silk Spear. Now, after defeating the Bell Beast and going to the right, as a few people in the comments pointed out on my last video, it's not a good idea to go through the Hunter's March, as it is a very dangerous area and isn't very beginner friendly. Instead, you can go to the bottom of this room, then exit to the right until you get to this large room with Chakra, which after climbing all the way up will lead you to a much easier access point to the dash ability, along with saving a lot of time as you're unlikely to die here. After obtaining the dash ability, there are some difficult things you have to take on, Lace of course being the first. However, there will be plenty of other difficult enemies to deal with later down the road. So after defeating Lace and heading to the right with this room, we can take another note from the old speedrun route, which picked up the Warding Bell. By heading to the small sewer area, we can pick up an item called the Warding Bell, which will make healing a lot more safe as most enemies won't be able to damage us while healing. However, if they hit Hornet, the healing animation will still cancel. Speedrunners have stopped picking this up at this point as it doesn't save time, however in the first week it helps survivability for most runners of the game. Equipping this Warding Bell at a bench will make the next few sections a whole lot easier, as there are many enemies that the Warding Bell will keep from damaging you while healing. With this, you'll likely want to go get the float ability from the next section of the game, and while you're over there you can gather a few extra rosaries by simply falling into this little area, where you will find a rosary strand which will help a lot with purchasing maps and items. Throughout the area where you gather the spines to craft the float ability, there aren't too many things to help you out. However, after getting the float ability, you normally would have to fight a boss. This mechanical giant in the background when you walked in will come to life if you try to exit, being called Fourth Chorus. And while you ordinarily would have to fight it, possibly dying a couple of times to it, instead there's a skip that you can do which will allow you to come back later and fight the boss when you're better prepared. By holding the dash button on the ground, you're able to run quickly along the ground area, and although this is useful, its true value shines here, where running and jumping near the edge of this platform then immediately using the float ability will allow you to float all the way to the other end. However, it's much easier to do the trick while healing midair, then floating and dashing to get to the other end, and with that you will have skipped the Fourth Chorus boss fight, although the boss itself is not one that I would call particularly difficult, so if you would rather just fight it, then that will work as well. With the float ability, you'll be able to access Greymore, and there are several things in Greymore that you'll probably want to collect. For starters, in this area off to the left, after doing some parkour, you'll be able to collect a new crest, that being the Reaper Crest. This will not only change your pogo to one more similar to the Hollow Knight pogo, but will also give you a buff after you heal, one which as long as you don't take damage will allow you to generate extra silk each time you hit an enemy. This is extremely useful when paired with the warding bell, as it almost always allows you to either defeat the enemy, whether it be by the warding bell dealing damage because they hit you, or by gathering extra silk and dealing with them that way, and this will be extremely useful when taking on the Morwing boss, one which a lot of people struggle with their first time around. With the Reaper Crest and the warding bell, this boss should give you a lot less struggles, and after dealing with it you will have access to Bell Heart. But you won't be able to exchange the thing you picked up earlier just yet, as the townspeople are trapped by silk strings, so first you will have to deal with a couple bosses, or using a clever strategy you can just deal with one. After leaving Bell Heart you will come across Shellwood, a large area with plenty of obstacles, and although there isn't much you can do right now, after traveling through the area for quite a bit you will come to this room with a strange spire sticking out of the ground, and this is the cue that you're in the right area. Ordinarily you would just move through this area and fight the Sister Splinter, a boss which hits the ground and usually takes a few tries to actually defeat. However, taking another note out of speedrunners books, if we instead taunt right here, you will notice that this enemy will start to follow you. This allows you to get it close enough to this platform that you can just barely pogo off it and get to this ledge, and after pogoing on this one to the left and making your way through the section, normally you will have gotten the Wall Cling ability, completely skipping Sister Splinter until you're stronger and better able to handle the more difficult bosses. With Sister Splinter skipped and the Wall Cling ability in your belt, you'll be able to travel to the right and take on Widow, the boss that is keeping the town of Bellheart hostage, and although she is a difficult boss, with the Warding Bell and Reaper's Crest it should only be a few attempts before she goes down. However, if you want to, you can instead explore the map, gather rosaries, and get enough mask shards to bring your masks up to 6, making the Widow boss a much easier fight for you. Unfortunately, this boss can't be entirely skipped as you need the ability to complete the game. However, after defeating the boss, you'll be able to free Bellheart and finally cash in that relic from the earlier part in the game, which will give an extra 180 rosaries for you to use. There's also an NPC in Bellheart that will upgrade your needle, which is very useful as it brings your needle damage from 5 to 9, almost doubling it and making encounters with the upcoming enemies much more easy. With Bellheart free, normally you would get the last couple old bells that you need in order to open the door in the Blasted Steps while also taking on the Last Judge. However, Last Judge is a pretty large skill check and the Blasted Steps area is pretty difficult to navigate through. But luckily, there is another way to get to the Citadel, that being through the Mists. The Mists are a semi-difficult area that lead up to a boss fight against the Phantom. Now, the Mists are somewhat difficult, having these Wraith enemies that will deal a lot of damage if caught. However, by jumping and pogoing off them, you'll be able to deal with them pretty easily. The main mechanic of the Mists are these little butterflies that you will have to play your needle in next to in order to find which exit you should take in the room you're in. However, there's a little trick to make this a whole lot easier. If you leave a room with an exit near butterflies, you can immediately turn back and play the needle in next to those butterflies instead of traversing through the next room. After following the butterflies for around 6 times, you'll be brought to a chamber with a door, and after going inside and traversing through, you will enter the boss fight against the Phantom. It is a difficult boss, however many players feel as though it is easier than Last Judge, and along with that you also receive an ability that will be extremely useful, allowing you to parry enemies by pressing F just before they attack. This can be extremely useful in several areas in the Citadel, and it's just about as useful as a Silk Spear in combat. With the Phantom defeated, there's one last thing that will be extremely useful to grab while in the Citadel, but this will require you to first take on the Cogwork Dancers, then go through some of the Cogwork Core section. However, after arriving in this room with a puzzle, you'll be able to push some blocks then pick up some pale oil, which will allow you to upgrade your nail a second time in Bellheart, putting your nail from 9 to 13 damage. With all of those things out of the way, you'll be able to deal with the rest of the challenges that Farloom has for you a lot more easily, and while exploring through the rest of the areas, you will gather a few other abilities to help you along the way. But with that, those are all of the skips and tricks you might need in Silksong, not only skipping over 2 full bosses, but skipping over the Last Judge by instead doing the Phantom fight, along with helping the collection of several abilities to make the game a whole lot easier. And although there are plenty of mask shard locations and other things I could have mentioned, I figured that it would be better to let all of you collect those as you go. Instead of telling you where each and every last thing is, you will instead be able to find those on your own, allowing you to experience the exploration of the game without taking away from it. If you watch this video all the way to the end, then thank you so much, as it does help support the channel. And speaking of supporting the channel, I would like to give a special shout out to the Epoch channel members. Their contribution is largely appreciated as it helps me make videos like this one, along with the theory videos and video essays that I occasionally do as well. And also, if you enjoyed, then consider subscribing, as I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers before the end of the year. And with that, I would just like to say this has been Epoch, your place for everything indie game related. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you all in the next one.